Woman saved by bear in the forest. The reason is very surprising. Amber Crawford stared bitterly at the headline on the website of the country's largest photography magazine. Award-winning photographer alters images of wild animals. The E words seemed to leap off the screen, stabbing through years of dedication and hard work. 15 years of an impeccable career destroyed in less than 24 hours. Her hands trembled as she reread the article for the 100th time. The accusations were specific and devastating. Her award-winning photographs of jaguars in Redwood National Park had allegedly been digitally manipulated to heighten the drama. An anonymous expert had supposedly identified inconsistencies in the shadows and positioning of the animals. The most painful part was the article's conclusion. Crawford crossed the line, separating art from deceit, betraying the trust of the public and the scientific community that relied on her images as an accurate record of American nature. Just then, her phone rang for the 10th time that morning. It was Tyler, her agent, his voice tense, exactly what Amber had expected to hear. Amber, National Wildlife cancelled the contract. They said they can't associate their name with yours. After this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Amber laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling it now? Everyone knows those photos weren't altered. This was a setup, Tyler. Look, I believe you, but the evidence is convincing and the damage is done. No magazine or newspaper will risk their reputation hiring you right now. That technical? A report is a fraud. Amber slammed her hand on the table. I would never ever manipulate a single shadow in my photos. Those jaguars were photographed exactly as they were. I spent 3 weeks in the wilderness, sleeping in makeshift hammocks, enduring bugs and rain to get those shots. Why would I ruin that with manipulation? I know, Amber. We've worked together for years. I know your ethics, but right now, your word against a technical committee isn't enough. We need concrete proof that the investigation was rigged. She hung up and stared at the luxurious New York City apartment she would soon no longer afford. Every object around her told a chapter of her life. Her first professional camera, worn from use, resting on a glass shelf. The trophy from the Ecology and Photography Award she'd won at 27. The framed photo of a manned wolf pup that catapulted her to international recognition. On the wall, a collection of awards and photographs showcased everything she'd achieved by 35. Specializing in wildlife, she had documented rare species across every American biome. Her thoughts drifted back to the exact moment her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had published a devastating series of photos exposing illegal deforestation on a property in Montana. The images captured bulldozers tearing down ancient trees, illegal burns and workers without proper protective gear. The landowner, Richard Blackwell, a real estate tycoon whose fortune was built on environmental destruction. Within days, Blackwell had launched a fierce campaign against her, first with legal threats, then attempts to discredit her professionally. Now it seemed he had found the perfect way to silence her. Accused of digitally altering her most famous photos, Amber watched her life crumble like a sandcastle. As tears streamed down her face, her eyes landed on an old black and white photo on the shelf. In it, her grandmother Eleanor smiled in front of a small wooden house on the edge of Wolf Ridge Forest Reserve in rural Oregon. Amber picked up the portrait, running her fingers over the dusty glass. Memories flooded her mind. Hot summers running among ancient trees, starry nights listening to stories about wild animals, chilly mornings accompanying her grandmother on her forest inspection walks. Eleanor Crawford had been an extraordinary woman, a retired teacher who dedicated the second half of her life to environmental preservation, facing loggers, ranchers, and politicians to protect that piece of the Atlantic forest. "Grandma, what would you do now?" Amber whispered to the photograph. She could almost hear the answer in her mind in her grandmother's firm yet gentle voice. "When the path ahead seems blocked, return to your roots to find a new direction." The house on the edge of the reserve was still rightfully hers, abandoned for nearly a decade after Eleanor's passing. Amber hadn't visited that place since her teenage years. At 16, she had left determined to conquer the world, with her camera vowing never to bury herself in the middle of nowhere, as she used to tell her grandmother. Eleanor would just smile, as if she knew something her granddaughter still had to discover. That night, after hours contemplating her increasingly limited options, Amber made a decision. If the urban world was rejecting her based on lies, she would find her way back through the purest truth. Untouched nature. She would return to her roots, to the place where she had learned to love wildlife long before she photographed it. 2 weeks later, after selling most of her belongings and packing what remained, Amber parked her car, loaded with photography equipment and personal items, in front of the small wooden house. The Wolf Ridge Forest Reserve stretched imposingly. In the background, with its ancient trees and the promise of refuge, the afternoon sun painted the tops of the redwoods with a golden light that, in another time, would have made her immediately reach for her camera. The dirt path leading to the house was partially overgrown with weeds, a clear sign of neglect. Amber took a deep breath, absorbing the scents of the forest. Damp earth, pine resin, wildflowers, so different from the air conditioning and artificial perfumes of her apartment in New York City. As she stepped out of the car, a wave of memories hit her with unexpected force. Right there on that same path, her grandmother had taught her to identify animal tracks. Under that sprawling tree, they had shared countless picnics. From the wooden porch, they had watched the stars together on summer nights while Eleanor told stories about the constellations. The house was more run down than she had expected. The wooden floorboards creaked under her feet, the roof showed signs of leaks, and the smell of mold filled the air. Spiderwebs decorated the corners, and a thin layer of dust covered the few pieces of furniture left behind. But for some inexplicable reason, Amber felt at home there, more than she ever had in her luxurious New York apartment. "Welcome back, Grandma," she whispered, touching the solid wood table where so many meals had been shared. As she unloaded the car, she noticed a man approaching along the dirt path. Tall, around 40, with broad shoulders and sun-tanned skin, he wore the olive-green uniform of the Reserve's administration. His face held a friendly curiosity. "Hello, you must be Mrs. Eleanor's granddaughter," he said, extending his hand, with a warm smile. "I'm Daniel Reynolds, a forest ranger. I heard someone was coming to the old house. I could hardly believe it when they told me it was you." Amber shook his hand, surprised to be recognized so quickly. "News travels fast. Round here, in Mountain Ridge, everyone knows everything." He grinned, revealing small wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor talked about you all the time. She showed your photos in magazines to anyone who'd look." She was very proud of her work. Amber felt a lump in her throat. The idea of her grandmother keeping and displaying her publications was both comforting and painful. "Did you know my grandmother well?" Daniel's expression softened, taking on a nostalgic quality. "I was just an intern when I met her. 22 years old, freshly graduated in biology, full of theories and little practice. Your grandmother taught me more about this forest than all my professors combined." He paused as if carefully choosing his next words. "She was a force of nature, that woman. When politicians first tried to shrink the reserve, she organized protests, rallied researchers, convinced journalists to cover the story. Alone, she took on an entire system." "That sounds exactly like the grandma I knew," Amber said with a sad smile. Daniel studied the house for a moment before continuing. "This area hasn't changed much since your grandmother lived here. The same families, the same disputes, the same slow pace, except, of course, for the fact that the reserve is under threat again." "Under threat? How?" Daniel crossed his arms, his face tightening with concern, deep lines forming on his forehead. "The state government is considering reducing the fully protected area. A businessman from New York City is interested in building a luxury resort here, claims it'll bring sustainable ecotourism, but we all know what that really means." His tone was bitter. Deforestation disguised as progress. A chill ran down Amber's spine. The story felt disturbingly familiar. "This businessman, by any chance, is his name Richard Blackwell?" The ranger raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Yes, do you know him?" Amber took a deep breath, trying to control the anger rising inside her. "You could say that. He's the one who destroyed my career." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. Daniel looked at her curiously, but Amber wasn't ready to share her full story. Instead, she asked about the local wildlife. Are there still maned wolves in the reserve? Yes, a few. In fact, we have one very special specimen. A lone wolf the locals call Ghost because it's extremely elusive. Hardly anyone ever sees it. Amber's eyes sparkled with professional interest. And bears? Daniel laughed. Bears in the United States? You know we don't have native bears here, right? But he hesitated for a moment. There's an interesting story. About 10 years ago, a grizzly bear escaped from a private animal sanctuary and was never recaptured. There are occasional sighting reports, but most people think they're just legends. I've never seen it myself. Amber felt a jolt of excitement. A rare maned wolf and possibly a grizzly bear living free in American territory. If she could photograph them, especially in their natural habitat, it would be a once-in-a-lifetime chance to restart her career. I have to go now, Daniel said. But if you need anything, my station is 2 miles down the main road. Oh, and a word of advice. Don't venture into the forest alone without telling someone. These woods can be dangerous if you don't know them. Amber thanked him and watched as the ranger walked away. Once he was out of sight, she smiled to herself. Venturing into the forest was exactly what she planned to do. That night, Amber slept poorly on the old mattress covered with clean sheets she'd brought. She dreamed of her grandmother walking through the forest, always a few steps ahead, beckoning her deeper into the trees. In the dream, Eleanor kept pointing insistently at something Amber couldn't see, her wrinkled face filled with urgency. She woke with a start at the first birdsong, her heart racing and a strange feeling that she wasn't alone. For a fleeting moment, she almost believed she'd find her grandmother sitting in the old rocking chair on the porch, just as she had so often in her youth. After brewing strong coffee in the partially functional kitchen, Amber sat on the porch steps, watching the sunrise filter through the branches of the redwoods. A sense of peace enveloped her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. This place was always your refuge too, wasn't it, Grandma? She murmured, sipping the bitter coffee. With renewed determination, she packed her backpack with camera, equipment, water, light snacks, a small first aid kit, and a two-way radio she'd bought especially for these expeditions. She double-checked her camera batteries, a professional habit even the recent scandal hadn't broken. The sun had barely risen when she stepped into the dense forest, following faint trails she vaguely remembered from her youth. Daniel had warned her not to venture out alone, but Amber felt an inexplicable urgency to reconnect with the woods, as if she might find answers there that the urban world had denied her. The forest was alive with sounds, the melodic songs of thrushes, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze, the occasional snap of branches broken by small animals. In the distance, the steady drumming of a woodpecker echoed like a natural metronome. Amber took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs, releasing months of pent-up tension. It's like coming home, she thought, surprised by the intensity of the feeling. For hours she walked quietly, relearning the rhythm of the forest. She stopped to photograph colorful bromeliads clinging to tree trunks, agile squirrels leaping between branches, and a majestic toko toucan that perched close enough for a perfect portrait. Every click of the camera was both a professional act and a therapeutic process, reconnecting her with her essence. But as she captured these images, her thoughts remained fixed on a greater goal, finding the maned wolf Daniel had mentioned, and, if she were extraordinarily lucky, the mysterious bear. On the third day of her expedition, Amber decided to venture deeper into the forest. She'd found tracks she believed belonged to a maned wolf and was determined to follow them. The trail led her to parts of the reserve that clearly hadn't been visited in years. That's when she heard the distant sound of heavy machinery. Curious and uneasy, she changed direction, following the noise that seemed out of place in this natural sanctuary. After 15 minutes of hiking, she hid behind some bushes and witnessed the unthinkable. Bulldozers tearing down ancient trees in an area that, according to the official reserve map Daniel had given her, was within the protected zone. Silently, Amber readied her camera and began photographing the illegal destruction. Among the workers, she recognized a man in a suit, gesturing and giving orders. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking him. It was Richard Blackwell, the man who had ruined her reputation and was now destroying the forest her grandmother had loved so dearly. When she tried to shift position for a better angle, Amber stepped on a dry branch that snapped loudly. Immediately, heads turned her way. Panicked, she stuffed the camera into her backpack and ran, plunging deeper into the dense woods, abandoning the familiar path. After running for several minutes with no sign of pursuit, she slowed down, only to realize she was completely lost. The trails had vanished, and the terrain grew increasingly rugged. A low mist began to form between the trees, drastically reducing visibility. Trying to stay calm, she grabbed the map and compass, but in her haste to escape, she hadn't properly marked her route. The sun was beginning to set, bringing with it the frightening prospect of spending the night lost in the forest. That was when the ground gave way beneath her feet. Amber felt her body tumble down a small, steep embankment, rolling over rocks and vegetation, until she came to an abrupt stop as she collided with the trunk of a fallen tree. The sharp pain in her ankle suggested a possible sprain, and her radio had broken in the fall. The situation was critical. Alone, injured, without communication, and with night approaching, Amber felt fear growing in her chest. Using a branch for support, she managed to stand and limp slowly, searching for a safe place to spend the night. Darkness had already taken over the forest when she found a small clearing surrounded by rocks that offered some protection. Leaning against the stones, she sat on the ground and opened her backpack to check her supplies. That was when she heard a branch snap nearby. She froze. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up with the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Slowly, she turned her head toward the sound and saw two yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. A maned wolf emerged from between the trees. It was larger than any specimen Amber had ever seen or photographed, with golden red fur and long black legs. It must have been the ghost that Daniel had mentioned. Under normal circumstances, maned wolves are shy animals that avoid confrontations with humans. But this one seemed different, thinner than usual, possibly hungry, and clearly territorial. The animal growled, baring sharp teeth, and began to approach slowly. Amber knew she couldn't run with her injured ankle. In a desperate move, she grabbed her backpack, ready to use it as a shield if necessary. The wolf took another step forward, tensing its muscles for a possible attack, when a deafening roar cut through the air. The sound was so powerful, so primal, that both Amber and the wolf froze. From behind a cluster of rocks emerged a massive figure. A grizzly bear with yellowish-brown fur and a distinctive hump on its shoulder rose onto its hind legs, standing over 6 feet tall. The animal dropped back onto all fours and positioned itself between Amber and the wolf, which retreated a few steps but maintained its aggressive stance. For a moment that felt like an eternity. The two predators stared each other down, the wolf growling and the bear emitting deep grunts. Then, in a move surprisingly quick for its bulk, the bear charged toward the wolf. The confrontation was brief and decisive. The wolf, realizing the disadvantage, backed away and disappeared into the forest's darkness. The bear, victorious, slowly turned to Amber, who remained motionless, pressed against the rocks, barely breathing. Their eyes met. In the animal's gaze, Amber saw a primal intelligence, a calculated assessment. The bear sniffed the air in her direction and, to her absolute astonishment, simply ignored her presence. The massive predator walked calmly away, following a path between the rocks until it vanished into the night. Only when the bear had been gone for several minutes did Amber finally exhale. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold her backpack. She had just witnessed something extraordinary, something very few people would have seen in the United States. A standoff between a maned wolf and a grizzly bear, both living freely in the American wilderness. And inexplicably, the bear had saved her. Dawn brought with it a light drizzle and Amber's painful awakening. She had slept only a few minutes during the night, always alert to any suspicious sound. Her ankle was swollen and sore, but she managed to stand by, leaning against the rocks. Orienting herself by the rising sun, she began limping slowly in the direction she believed would lead her back to the main trail. With every step, she relived the events of the previous night. Why had the bear chased off the wolf? And why had it completely ignored her afterward? After 2 hours of painful walking, she heard voices calling her name. Daniel and 2 other forest rangers appeared through the trees, visibly relieved to find her. "My God, Amber, we've been searching for you since last night," exclaimed Daniel, rushing to help her. "When I saw your car still parked at the house and you hadn't returned by nightfall, we organized a search party." At the ranger station, while a paramedic tended to her ankle, Amber told Daniel about the illegal logging. She had witnessed and showed him the photos she had managed to take before being discovered. "This is illegal on so many levels, I don't even know where to begin," said Daniel, examining the images with a grave expression. "I'll report this immediately to the environmental authorities, but I'm not very hopeful. Blackwell has powerful connections." Amber hesitated before mentioning the bear and the wolf. Would she be called crazy or a liar, especially after the scandal of the allegedly doctored photos? But Daniel didn't seem to doubt her story. "A grizzly in Wolf Ridge," he murmured thoughtfully. "There have been rumors for years, but we've never had confirmation, and it just ignored you. Completely. It was like I didn't matter, not as a threat, not as prey." "Fascinating. Normally grizzlies are territorial. Maybe it was just defending its territory from the wolf and you were just a detail in the landscape." Amber considered this for a moment. An idea began forming in her mind. "Daniel, I need to find that bear again. I need to photograph it, document its behavior. A grizzly living freely in the United States, interacting with native wildlife. This is unprecedented. It's important for science." "It's also incredibly dangerous," Daniel warned her. "You got lucky yesterday. Don't push it." But determination had already settled in Amber's gaze. This was her chance for redemption, to rebuild her career on something real and extraordinary, not just for herself, but to protect the reserve her grandmother had loved so much. "I'll find it again," she said firmly, "and I'll figure out what it's protecting in this forest." In the weeks that followed, Amber established a routine. Every morning, once her ankle had healed enough, she ventured into the forest, with her photography equipment, following a carefully planned pattern to cover different areas of the reserve. She always carried a radio, now with a spare battery, informed Daniel of her planned route and returned before nightfall. On her expeditions, she documented an impressive variety of wildlife, groups of coatis, pacas, tapirs, mountain lions, at a distance, and even the elusive maned wolf that had attacked her, now observed safely from afar with a powerful telephoto lens. But the bear remained elusive. One particularly hot afternoon, Amber discovered an abandoned forestry service cabin tucked away in a remote area of the reserve. The structure was dilapidated, vines creeping up the wooden walls, but it still offered shelter. Inside, among cobwebs and dust, she found something unexpected. Dusty file boxes containing field journals from a researcher who had studied the region nearly 15 years earlier. The journals, written by a certain Dr. Robert Stevens, contained meticulous observations about the local wildlife, with special emphasis on a grizzly bear that had escaped from a nearby private sanctuary. August 24th, 2010. The bear, which I named Baloo, seems to have established a surprisingly large territory. His foraging routes follow specific patterns, always ending near Crystal Creek. Unlike bears in their natural habitat in the northern hemisphere, Baloo has adapted remarkably well to the local diet, feeding mostly on fruit, honey, and occasionally small mammals. The most fascinating thing is his relationship with the water source. He seems to actively protect it from other predators, especially the local wolves. Amber Crawford felt her heart race as she flipped through the journals. Crystal Creek. She had to find it. If the bear still followed the same behavioral patterns, that would be the place to photograph him. Over the next few days, she set up temporary camps near the abandoned cabin, using the maps in the journals to locate the famous creek. The vegetation had changed significantly over 15 years, making the task harder than she expected. Meanwhile, in the small town of Mountain Ridge, her presence and activities were starting to stir whispers. Richard Blackwell had arrived personally to oversee the final negotiations for the land purchase, and soon learned about the photographer who had settled in the old house near the reserve. On a rainy afternoon, as Amber returned from another fruitless expedition, she found a luxury car, parked in front of her house. Leaning against it, holding a black umbrella with a calculated smile, was Richard Blackwell. "Amber Crawford," he said, savoring each syllable. "What a surprise to find you here, so far from New York City. I heard your photography career has faced some setbacks lately." Amber felt her blood boil but kept her composure. "What do you want, Blackwell? Wasn't ruining my reputation enough? Now you've come to destroy the forest my grandmother spent her life protecting?" The businessman laughed, a humorless sound. "Your grandmother was a stubborn old woman who refused to sell this land when it would have been profitable for her. I see stubbornness runs in the family." He took a step toward her. "I've heard rumors you've been photographing things you shouldn't on my future property." "Your future property? This is a protected forest reserve by law." "Laws change, my dear, especially when you know the right people." Richard adjusted his expensive suit. "I'm here to offer you a deal. Stop interfering in my business, and I might consider giving you a chance at professional redemption. Think about it. Amber Crawford, official photographer of the new Wolf Ridge Eco Resort. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Amber glared at him in disgust. "I'd rather document the truth, like the illegal logging you've already started, before even getting approval." The smile vanished from Richard's face. "Be careful, Amber. The forest can be dangerous for someone wandering alone. Accidents happen, and this time there won't be a bear to save you." Amber froze. "How do you know about the bear?" Richard smiled again, pleased to have gotten her reaction. "Workers talk and I listen. A grizzly in Wolf Ridge would be quite the attraction for my resort, don't you think? Alive or as a magnificent rug in the lobby." He got into his car before Amber could respond. As the vehicle drove away, she stood motionless, her body trembling not from fear but renewed determination. Now, more than ever, she needed to find the bear and the creek he protected. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Thus, the next morning at the Mountain Ridge Town Hall, a public hearing was held regarding the proposal to reduce the protected area of Wolf Ridge Forest Reserve to allow construction of the resort. The small auditorium was packed with local residents, regional press representatives, and of course Richard Blackwell and his team of lawyers and advisors. Amber Crawford discreetly sat at the back of the room. She had spent the entire night reviewing Dr. Stevens's journals and studying old maps. She had a plan but needed more time. The mayor, a short man visibly nervous, tried to mediate the heated discussion between residents who feared losing jobs if tourism wasn't expanded in the area, and local environmentalists advocating for the full preservation of the reserve. Richard Blackwell took the stage with the confidence of someone who already knew the outcome of the meeting. "My dear friends from Mountain Ridge," he began in a honeyed voice, "I understand the concerns of the conservationists here. I also love nature. That's why my project for the Wolf Ridge Eco Resort is groundbreaking. We'll use only sustainable materials, secure international certification, and most importantly, create over 200 direct jobs for local residents." A wave of approving murmurs swept through the audience. "Furthermore," Richard continued, "we'll allocate a portion of the profits to a conservation fund that will finance research and preservation efforts within the reserve itself. It's a win-win for the environment, the local economy, and the future of Mountain Ridge." The applause was exactly what he expected. Amber watched in disgust, recognizing the manipulation in every carefully chosen word. Daniel, the park ranger, stood to speak. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwell, the area you intend to acquire includes springs that supply not just the reserve, but also the farms in the region. Any disruption to this ecosystem could have serious consequences." "I appreciate your concern," Richard interrupted, "but our environmental impact studies, conducted by renowned experts, clearly show our project won't affect any significant water sources. I have the reports right here if anyone wishes to review them." Amber couldn't take it anymore. She stood and walked to the center of the auditorium. "Were those reports made before or after you began illegal deforestation in the northern zone of the reserve, Mr. Blackwell?" A deathly silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to her. "And who might you be?" asked the mayor, clearly uncomfortable with the interruption. "My name is Amber Crawford. I'm a wildlife photographer and the granddaughter of Eleanor Crawford, who dedicated her life to establishing and preserving the Wolf Ridge Forest Reserve." Murmurs of recognition spread among the older residents. Eleanor had been a respected figure in the community. "And I have proof," Amber continued, raising her camera, "of deforestation operations occurring within the reserve's fully protected zone without any authorization from environmental agencies." Richard Blackwell remained calm, but his clenched jaw betrayed his irritation. "Ah yes, Amber Crawford, the photographer who was exposed for digitally manipulating her images. Forgive me if I don't put much stock in your proof." Amber felt the sting but didn't back down. "The accusations against me were fabricated, just like your environmental reports. And everyone here knows who had the motive to discredit me." She connected her camera to the auditorium's projector and displayed photos of Blackwell's tractors and workers clearing protected land. The date and GPS coordinates were visible in each image. "This is trespassing on private property," protested one of Richard's lawyers. "No, it's not," Daniel replied, standing again. "Those coordinates are unmistakably within the reserve's fully protected zone, where any extractive activity is prohibited by federal law." The mood in the room shifted visibly. The mayor seemed increasingly nervous, while Richard maintained a forced smile. "Accidents happen during preliminary surveys," he said smoothly. "If there was any activity beyond the permitted limits, I'll take immediate action. I thank Miss Crawford for bringing this to our attention." Amber wasn't fooled by the false cordiality. "There's something else everyone should know," she continued. "The Wolf Ridge Forest Reserve is home to rare species, some possibly still undocumented. I'm conducting a photographic study that, once completed, will be submitted to the NIBC for possible reclassification of the reserve as a nationally significant preservation area." This was a half-truth. Amber did plan to document the region's wildlife, especially the extraordinary grizzly bear, but she hadn't yet contacted the National Institute for Biodiversity Conservation. "What species would those be, Miss Crawford?" asked a journalist. In the room, Amber hesitated, revealing the bear's presence could endanger it, especially with Richard Blackwell already expressing interest in turning it into an attraction or trophy. "My work is still ongoing. I'll share the full results when the time is right." Richard clapped slowly, a gesture dripping with sarcasm. "Mysterious species only you've seen. How convenient. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not let delay tactics, based on empty promises, hold back Mountain Ridge's progress." The hearing ended without a clear resolution, but Amber had gotten what she wanted: time. The mayor, pressured by the controversy, announced he'd postpone any decision until an independent commission assessed the illegal deforestation claims. As she left the auditorium, Amber was approached by an elderly woman walking with the aid of an ornate wooden cane. "You have her eyes," the woman said with a gentle smile. "Eleanor's. The same determination, too." "You knew my grandmother?" "Oh yes, I was her teacher, then her lifelong friend. I'm Mrs. Margaret." The old woman shook Amber's hand with surprising strength for her apparent age. "Eleanor spoke so much about you. Said you'd inherited her love for nature." Amber felt a wave of emotion. Her grandmother had passed away when she was just starting her career, and she missed her every day. "She'd be fighting this resort, wouldn't she?" "Tooth and nail," Mrs. Margaret confirmed. "In fact, she already fought Richard Blackwell once before, you know?" Amber looked at the woman in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Nearly 20 years ago, when he was still building his empire, he tried to buy the reserve land, offered a fortune to the town. Eleanor gathered proof of environmental violations in his other projects and threatened to expose everything. He backed down, but swore he'd return one day." Amber felt the pieces falling into place. Richard's vendetta against her wasn't just about her recent photos exposing deforestation. It was about an old grudge with her grandmother. "Mrs. Margaret, I need to know more. Did my grandmother leave any documents, any proof of those violations?" The old woman smiled mysteriously. "You already have access to everything you need, dear. You just need to look in the right places. Eleanor would never leave the reserve unprotected. Before Amber could ask more, Daniel approached them. "Amber, impressive work in there, but you need to be careful. Blackwell isn't the type to accept defeat, even temporary." "I'm aware of the risks. I heard you're still searching for the bear." "And Crystal Creek. I found a researcher's journals in the abandoned cabin. Dr. Robert Stevens studied that bear years ago." Daniel's eyes widened. "Robert Stevens? He was a genius." "He disappeared mysteriously after publishing a controversial study about water contamination in the region. Many believe he was discouraged from continuing his work." Amber and Mrs. Margaret exchanged worried glances. "I think I know where Crystal Creek is," Daniel continued, lowering his voice. "But I've never been able to reach it. It's an extremely rugged area, and the old trails have disappeared over time. I can try to sketch a rough map for you. That would be a huge help." As Daniel scribbled an improvised map in his notebook, Mrs. Margaret squeezed Amber's arm. "Be careful, my dear. Some waters are more precious than they seem." In the following days, Amber intensified her expeditions, now with a clearer goal. Based on Daniel's map and the diary notes, she focused her search on a mountainous region in the heart of the reserve. The weather didn't cooperate. Frequent rains turned the trails muddy and dangerous, while morning fogs reduced visibility. Each day she returned home exhausted and empty-handed, only to start again the next morning. On one of these expeditions, she found unsettling evidence, fresh tire marks in an area where no vehicles should be. Following the trail, she discovered a hastily abandoned temporary camp, with geological surveying equipment and several sample collection bottles. She meticulously photographed everything and sent the images to Daniel. His reply came quickly, by message. "They're looking for something. We need to find out what before they do." On the 7th night after the public hearing, a violent storm hit the region. Amber watched from the window of the small house as lightning lit up the forest and wind howled around the wooden structure. That's when she noticed vehicle headlights approaching on the dirt road. 3 pickup trucks stopped in front of the house. From one of them stepped Richard Blackwell, shielded from the rain by an umbrella held by one of his security men. Without ceremony, he knocked on the door. Amber opened it just a crack, her phone ready to call Daniel if needed. "What do you want on a night like this, Blackwell?" "To talk civilly." "May I come in?" "I'm soaked." Against her better judgment, Amber let him in, keeping the door open despite the rain. Richard entered, shaking water off his expensive coat. "Your performance at the hearing was impressive," he said, glancing around the simple house. "You got exactly what you wanted, a delay for my plans." "It's not a delay, it's the end of them." Richard laughed. "Do you really believe that? The mayor is my ally, the council members too. They're just waiting for the dust to settle to approve everything. The photos of the illegal deforestation will be dismissed as inconclusive or manipulated. After all, you have a history of that, don't you?" Amber felt her face burn with anger. "What do you want from me?" Richard walked to the window, watching the storm-lashed forest. "The same thing I wanted from your grandmother 20 years ago, for you to get out of my way. But I'll offer you something better than what I offered her. $1 million for your house and land, and an exclusive contract as the resort's photographer, with your name fully restored in the industry." Amber couldn't help but let out a disbelieving laugh. "You really think you can buy me? Everyone has a price. Your grandmother's was absurdly high, but you—" He turned to face her. "You've lost everything. Your career, your reputation, your future. I'm offering you a second chance." "What's in this forest that's worth so much, Blackwell? It's not just a resort, is it? What are you really after?" For a fleeting moment, something like surprise crossed the businessman's face, quickly replaced by his usual artificial smile. "Just progress, my dear. Progress and profit. 2 concepts that people like you and your grandmother will never fully understand." A particularly loud thunderclap shook the house. The lights flickered and went out, leaving them in the dim glow of occasional lightning and the faint light of candles Amber quickly lit. "Think about my offer," said Richard, walking toward the door. "You have until the end of the week. After that, I can't guarantee the safety of your expeditions in the forest, or that bear you're so eager to photograph." When Richard left, Amber locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding in her chest. The threat was clear. She needed to find the bear and Crystal Creek before it was too late. The storm lasted most of the night, but by dawn, the sky was surprisingly clear. Amber packed her backpack more carefully than ever, checking each item twice. Today, she would go farther than on any previous expedition. Following Daniel's map and the estimated coordinates from Dr. Stevens' journals, she ventured into a part of the reserve that seemed almost untouched. The storm had left the terrain even more treacherous, with temporary streams cutting across trails and fallen trees blocking paths. After hours of arduous hiking, Amber found herself in an area that matched the descriptions in the journals, a narrow gorge between two rock formations, with dense vegetation growing on the steep slopes. That's when she heard it, not the usual. Forest sounds, but something different, the crystal-clear bubbling of running water in considerable volume. Following the sound, she passed between moss-covered rocks and found herself facing a sight that took her breath away. A waterfall of crystal-clear water plunged from a height of about 30 feet, forming a natural pool that narrowed into a winding creek flowing down the valley. The water was astonishingly clear, revealing the rocky bed in shades of blue and green. She had found Crystal Creek. With hands trembling from excitement, Amber set up her camera and began taking photos. The morning light created a rainbow in the waterfall's mist, while small native fish swam peacefully in the natural pool. She was so absorbed in her work that she barely noticed the subtle change in the surroundings, the sudden silence of birds, the almost palpable tension in the air. Slowly, she lowered her camera and turned around. Less than 60 feet away, standing between two trees, was the grizzly bear. The morning sun lit up its golden-brown fur, highlighting the powerful muscles beneath its thick coat. It was even bigger than Amber remembered, a colossus of primal strength watching her with eyes of ancient intelligence. Moving slowly and deliberately, she adjusted her camera and began photographing. The bear showed no sign of disturbance, continuing to observe her as it approached the creek's edge to drink. That's when Amber noticed something strange in the water near the banks. Small glittering crystals reflected the sunlight embedded in the submerged rocks. They weren't ordinary minerals. They had a peculiar bluish tint. The bear drank deeply and then, to Amber's surprise, stepped into the water and began swimming calmly in the natural pool. It was unusual behavior for grizzlies, which typically aren't enthusiastic swimmers unless hunting or crossing obstacles. After a few minutes, the bear emerged from the water and shook itself vigorously. Then it looked directly at Amber, as if making sure she was still there, and slowly walked back into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Taking a deep breath to calm her racing heart, Amber approached the creek's edge and examined the crystals embedded in the rocks. Carefully, she collected a few samples in a glass vial she always carried for botanical specimen documentation. Consulting her map, she noticed something crucial. Crystal Creek didn't appear on the official reserve maps. Somehow, this important water source had been deliberately omitted from the records, and if she followed the natural terrain, the creek likely flowed directly into the area where Richard Blackwell planned to build his resort. With the physical evidence of the strange crystals and dozens of photos of the bear and the creek, Amber began her journey back, her mind buzzing with questions. What were those crystals? Why had the creek been left off the maps? And what was the real reason behind Richard Blackwell's obsessive interest in that specific area? When she reached the village by late afternoon, Amber went straight to the Forest Ranger Station. Daniel wasn't there, but one of his colleagues informed her he'd gone to an emergency meeting at the town hall about recent changes to the resort proposal. Worried, Amber quickly drove to the town hall, where she found a small crowd of locals gathered in front of the building. Daniel was among them, his expression grim. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping closer. Blackwell changed the plan. Now he wants not just the resort, but also a mining concession for part of the reserve. He claims to have found significant evidence of valuable minerals that could transform the local economy. "He's after the crystals," Amber murmured. "Daniel, I found Crystal Creek and the bear." The ranger's eyes widened. "Did you photograph it?" "Everything. And I collected samples of those strange crystals in the creek's rocks. We need to analyze them. Daniel thought for a moment. I know someone who can help. An old college friend who works in geology. I'll contact her right away. That evening at Amber's house, Daniel returned with news. Remember that researcher, Dr. Stevens, whose journals you found? He asked, sitting at the kitchen table. I dug up more about him. After his disappearance, he resurfaced years later, working for an international mining company in Australia. Strange, isn't it? Like he'd been bought off? Amber suggested. Exactly. And guess who's one of the major shareholders in that mining company? Richard Blackwell. A chill ran down Amber's spine. What is he hiding, Daniel? What's in that creek? My geologist friend is coming tomorrow to analyze your samples. Until then, keep this between us. Blackwell has eyes and ears everywhere. The next morning, a young woman with curly hair tied in a bun and thick-framed. Glasses knocked on Amber's door. She introduced herself as Dr. Catherine Ross, a mineralogy expert and Daniel's old college friend. After examining the samples with portable equipment she'd brought, Catherine looked up in astonishment. This is incredible. These aren't ordinary stones, Amber. They're imperial topaz crystals with a concentration of rare elements I've never seen before. This specific type with this color and purity is extremely valuable, used not just in high-end jewelry, but also in advanced tech components. How valuable are we talking? Daniel asked. Millions. Maybe billions, depending on the deposit size. Catherine adjusted her glasses, but the most fascinating part isn't that. These crystals have a chemical composition suggesting potential medicinal properties. Preliminary studies indicate similar compounds could have applications in cancer treatments. Amber and Daniel exchanged alarmed glances. That's the real reason Blackwell wants that land, Amber concluded. It's not the resort, it's a mine. That would completely destroy the ecosystem of Crystal Creek and likely the entire watershed of the region, added Daniel. We need to expose this, said Amber, determined. I have photos of the creek, the bear, the crystals. We can prove he's lying about his intentions. Daniel shook his head, worried. It won't be easy. He already has most of the local politicians in his pocket and is probably just waiting for the dust to settle to push forward with his real plans. Besides, technically, mineral exploration is legal as long as it's done with the proper permits, which he'll certainly get. Then we need a different approach, Catherine interjected. If we can prove Crystal Creek is essential for preserving endangered species, we can request special protection that would block any kind of exploitation in the area. The bear, Amber exclaimed. A grizzly bear living freely in the United States dependent on that specific creek. That's absolutely unprecedented and scientifically significant. But we need more than just a few photos, Daniel argued. We need a full study, extensive documentation, proof that the bear truly depends on that specific habitat. Amber thought for a moment. Dr. Stevens's journals are a start, and I'm sure my grandmother left more information somewhere. Mrs. Margaret said I already have access to everything I need. That's when an idea struck Amber. The basement. The house has a small basement I haven't even checked since I arrived. My grandmother kept old documents down there. The three quickly descended into the basement through a narrow staircase. The space was cramped and dusty, lit only by a single dim bulb. Boxes and old furniture were stacked against the walls. After an hour of methodical searching, they found what they were looking for, a locked metal box with Eleanor Crawford engraved on the lid. There was no visible key. I need to find the key, Amber murmured, frustrated. Or... Daniel pulled a small multi-tool kit from his pocket. Within minutes, he managed to pick the lock without damaging the box. Inside were folders organized, chronologically, containing documents, old maps of the reserve, official correspondence, and dozens of black and white photographs. One folder in particular caught Amber's eye. Crystal Water Project, 1985. Opening it, they found a full report conducted by a young biologist named Robert Blackwell, Richard's father. My God, Amber whispered as she read. Robert Blackwell discovered the crystals during a hydrological study in the reserve 40 years ago. But instead of reporting the find, he tried to secretly buy the land to exploit it. My grandmother uncovered his plans and gathered all this evidence against him. That explains Richard's personal vendetta against your family, Daniel noted. Among the documents was also a detailed map of the region's water system, showing how Crystal Creek fed dozens of smaller streams and several springs that, in turn, supplied farms and even the municipal reservoir. Any contamination in Crystal Creek would affect the entire region, Catherine concluded, studying the map. It's an interconnected watershed. Amber kept exploring the documents and found something even more surprising: a preliminary study on the medicinal properties of the crystals, conducted secretly by Eleanor and a local doctor. The study suggested that the creek water, naturally, infused with minerals from the crystals, had significant therapeutic properties. That explains the bear's behavior, Amber said excitedly. He's not just protecting his territory, he's protecting his source of health. We need more evidence of this, Daniel cautioned. Assumptions won't convince anyone, especially against someone with Richard Blackwell's power. Amber closed the folder, determined. So I'll return to Crystal Creek tomorrow. I'll set up a hidden observation post and document the bear's behavior for as long as necessary. If it's truly using that water for its medicinal properties, I need to capture it on video. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. The next morning, Amber prepared for an extended expedition. Besides her photography equipment, she packed a camouflage tent, supplies for 3 days, and a special camera with night vision and motion sensors to capture animal activity even when she wasn't present. Daniel insisted on accompanying her part of the way, helping carry the heavier gear. I don't like the idea of you being alone out there for so long, he said as they walked the steep trail. I'll be fine. I have the radio and my phone works. On some higher points. Blackwell knows you found something. He won't just sit back and let you gather evidence against him. Amber stopped and faced Daniel firmly. I know the risks, but this might be our only chance to save the reserve and expose the truth. I can't back down now. When they reached the waterfall area, Daniel helped Amber set up camp in a discreet, elevated spot with a good view of Crystal Creek but well hidden among rocks and vegetation. They placed the automatic cameras at strategic points around the natural pool. I'll be back in 3 days, Daniel promised before leaving. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll bring reinforcements. Alone, Amber organized her small observation post with the efficiency of someone used to fieldwork. Over the next few hours, she photographed the area extensively, documenting every aspect of the creek's ecosystem. By late afternoon, she spotted the bear for the first time. The animal appeared silently among the trees, sniffing the air cautiously before approaching the water. Amber held her breath as she photographed its every move. The bear's behavior was methodical, almost ritualistic. First, it drank deeply, then entered the water and remained partially submerged for nearly 20 minutes, something unusual for its species. Stranger still, it seemed to focus on a specific area of the pool where the crystals were most abundant. When night fell, Amber reluctantly retreated to her tent, leaving the automatic cameras on watch. She reviewed the day's photos, impressed by the image quality and the animal's majestic beauty. The next morning, she checked the night recordings and discovered something remarkable. The bear had returned before dawn, and in the dark, had used its claws to collect smaller crystals from the creek bed. Then, in extraordinary behavior, it had rubbed the crystals on an old wound on its front paw. Self-medication, Amber whispered in awe. This behavior had been documented in some animals, but never in this specific way with bears, especially not a grizzly living outside its natural habitat. On the second day, she documented other animals visiting the creek: deer, small rodents, various birds, and at dusk, the very same ghost that had attacked her. The wolf drank cautiously and quickly disappeared, as if aware it was in another's territory. It was on the morning of the third day that something unexpected happened. Amber woke to the sound of human voices. Carefully peeking through the tent flap, she saw 3 men with mining equipment examining the creek's banks. The boss was right, said one, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard. This is the spot. Look at the concentration of crystals in this area. How long until we start the operation? Asked a younger man as he collected samples in vials. Blackwell said as soon as the paperwork is settled. A week, 2 at most. The City Hall has already unofficially approved everything. Amber felt her blood run cold. Richard had sped up his plans. They were out of time. The men continued their work, mapping the area and marking specific spots with colored stakes. They didn't notice the small camouflaged tent hidden among the rocks or the strategically placed cameras. When they finally left, Amber emerged from her hiding spot, trembling, not from fear, but from fury. Quickly she gathered her cameras, and some of the stakes left behind as evidence. She needed to get back to the village immediately. As she was packing her equipment, she heard a branch snap behind her. She turned sharply, expecting to see the bear, but instead she faced Richard. Blackwell, flanked by 2 security guards. "What a coincidence running into you here, Miss Crawford," he said with a cold smile. "Admiring the scenery that will soon be part of the most exclusive resort in the United States?" Amber met his gaze. "You never cared about a resort. It was always about the crystals." Richard feigned surprise. "Crystals? I don't know what you're talking about." "I know about your father, how he discovered the crystals decades ago and how my grandmother stopped him from illegally exploiting the area. I found all the documents." Something shifted in Richard's expression, a flicker of concern quickly masked. "Documents can be forged, just like your photographs, isn't that right? I have more than enough evidence to expose your real plan, including recordings of your employees openly talking about the mining operation." The guards stepped forward, but Richard stopped them with a gesture. "Do you know why your photo scandal was so devastating, Amber? Because people want to believe the worst. It's human nature. And who will believe you now, a discredited photographer, against a respected businessman promising progress and jobs?" Amber stood her ground, though her mind raced, weighing her options. She was alone, outnumbered, and no one knew exactly where she was, except Daniel, who wouldn't be back until the next day. "Shall make this easy for you," Richard continued. "Hand over your cameras, the documents you found, and that vial of crystals in your jacket pocket. In return, you can walk away safely. That's my final offer." "And if I refuse?" Richard shrugged, a casual gesture that belied the threat in his words. "The forest is dangerous. People get lost. Sometimes they're never found." Amber's heart pounded, but she showed no fear. "It doesn't matter what you do to me. Daniel has copies of everything. Dr. Catherine Ross has already analyzed the crystals and knows their value. The truth will come out, with or without me." This seemed to catch Richard off guard. He frowned and turned to whisper something to one of the guards, who immediately pulled out a phone and stepped away to make a call. Seizing the momentary distraction, Amber discreetly activated the audio recording on her phone in her pocket. "What's your real interest in these crystals, Richard?" she asked, buying time. "Is it just greed, or is there more?" The businessman studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "You're more like your grandmother than you realize. She wanted to know everything too." He sighed, almost nostalgic. "My father was a visionary. He discovered the medicinal properties of these crystals before anyone else. He could have revolutionized the pharmaceutical industry if your grandmother hadn't interfered. He wanted to exploit the area illegally, destroying an entire ecosystem. He wanted progress," exclaimed Richard, momentarily losing his composure. "And I will finish what he started. These stones are worth more than you can imagine, not just as gems, but for what they can do. The medicinal properties, exactly. We're talking about a potentially revolutionary treatment for degenerative diseases. It's worth billions in the global market. And the environmental cost doesn't matter?" Richard laughed bitterly. "There will always be more forests, more animals. But opportunities like this come once in a lifetime." The security guard returned and whispered something in Richard's ear, his face hardening. "Seems we have a problem. Your forest ranger friend is becoming a nuisance." "Well, this speeds up my timeline." He gestured to the guards. "Take her and her things. Let's settle this now." Amber stepped back, frantically searching for an escape route, when a deafening roar cut through the air. The 4 froze. At the edge of the clearing, standing on its hind legs in all its imposing height, was the grizzly bear. The afternoon sun reflected off its golden fur, giving it an almost mythical appearance. "Don't move," whispered Richard, his face pale with fear. The guards, panicking, drew their weapons. The sudden movement provoked the bear, which dropped to all fours and charged toward them with a threatening roar. The men scrambled behind the trees. Richard, however, stumbled and fell onto the rocks by the creek. The bear kept advancing, ignoring Amber completely, focused on the intruders who had invaded its territory. The guards fled deeper into the forest, abandoning Richard, who struggled to get up, apparently injured from the fall. The bear stopped a few feet from him, its eyes locked on the now trembling businessman. "Help," murmured Richard, looking at Amber with wide, panicked eyes. "Please do something!" In that moment, seeing the powerful businessman reduced to a state of primal terror, Amber felt a confusing mix of emotions. Part of her felt a dark satisfaction, seeing the man who had destroyed her career shaking with fear. Another part, the one her grandmother had carefully nurtured, recognized that abandoning any human being to danger wasn't who she was. Frozen, Amber was torn between self-preservation and the urge to help when the bear did something entirely unexpected. Ignoring Richard lying on the ground, the animal deliberately stepped around him and entered the creek, positioning itself in the current. With its paws firmly planted among the crystal-clear stones, the bear turned to face them, its posture not one of attack, but of defense, like a guardian at its post. It was then that Amber understood, with sudden and profound clarity. The animal had never been interested in attacking them as prey. It wasn't defending a general territory as bears normally do. It was protecting something far more specific and precious. The creek, its source of life and healing. The crystals shimmering. Beneath the clear water were the true treasure the bear guarded so zealously. A distant memory surfaced in Amber's mind. Her grandmother telling her about forest guardians, protective spirits the local indigenous people revered. "Guardians aren't always who we expect," Eleanor would say with a mysterious smile. Amber had dismissed those stories as charming superstitions. Now faced with this extraordinary phenomenon, she began to realize her grandmother might have understood the forest on a much deeper level than she'd ever imagined. Slowly, with deliberately gentle movements, Amber approached Richard, who had crawled away from the water and was now leaning against a tree trunk, his expensive suit smeared with mud and leaves. "He won't attack unless we threaten the creek," she said, extending her hand to help the businessman up. "That's what he's protecting, not his general territory. It's the water, the crystals. You're safe if you respect them." Richard, still trembling, reluctantly leaned on her. "That thing is a monster. It should be put down. He could have attacked you, but he didn't. He's just defending something precious. Just like my grandmother did, just like I'm doing now." The bear remained in the creek, watchful but not aggressive, as Amber and Richard slowly moved away from the area. When they reached a safe distance, Richard pulled away from Amber's support. "This changes nothing," he said, regaining some of his arrogance. "I still have the power and connections to get what I want." "Then you didn't see what I saw," Amber replied calmly. "That bear, that creek, they're extraordinary, a unique natural phenomenon that deserves protection. And I'll make sure the whole world knows it." Richard stared at her with a mix of anger and curiosity. "Why do you care so much? It's just a forest, a bear." "Because some things are worth more than money. My grandmother knew that, and deep down, so do you." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, broken by the sound of approaching voices. Daniel emerged from the trees, accompanied by federal wildlife officers and a local TV crew. "Amber," he called, rushing to her. "Are you okay? We saw the guards running away and feared the worst." "I'm fine," she assured him, then noticed the TV crew. "What's going on?" Daniel smiled. "After you left, I kept digging. I found more documents in the basement, including records that your grandmother had formally requested the NIBC to declare Crystal Creek a special protection area because of its unique properties. The process was mysteriously shelved, but I managed to reopen it." Catherine, the geologist, stepped forward eagerly. "And my analysis confirmed it. The crystals have significant medicinal properties. But the most incredible part is that they only retain these properties in their natural environment. Once extracted, they lose most of their therapeutic potential." The TV reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mr. Blackwell, Is it true your company was planning a secret mining operation in a protected environmental area? Richard straightened, his posture trying to regain composure. No comment for now. My lawyers will issue an official statement. And what about the accusations that your father attempted the same decades ago and was stopped by illegal practices? Richard's face paled. For a man used to controlling narratives with money and power, being confronted with hard evidence seemed like an alien experience. His eyes darted across the group, searching in vain for allies or an escape route. How did you... he muttered, his voice losing its usual confidence. We found all the documents, Daniel explained, his tone mixing professional satisfaction with personal vindication. Your grandmother had a safety net, Amber. She never trusted just one copy of anything. Mrs. Margaret had duplicates of everything, sent by Eleanor for a rainy day, as she put it. We have documents, photos, correspondence, everything, including the original letters where Robert Blackwell, your father, admitted to trying to bribe public officials to hide reports about the crystals, Catherine added, addressing Richard. It's fascinating how similar your handwriting is, especially the signatures. Any handwriting expert would spot it immediately. Richard adjusted his crumpled, dirty suit jacket, a pathetic attempt to salvage his dignity. For a moment her gaze met Amber's, and she saw something unexpected there. Not just anger or frustration, but a shadow of recognition, as if she finally understood she was standing before the true granddaughter of Eleanor Crawford. As the reporter continued to bombard the businessman with increasingly pointed questions, and Daniel coordinated the environmental inspectors to document the deforestation evidence, Amber felt a strange sense of detachment. As if this entire scene, the media, the accusations, the exposure, was less important than something more fundamental happening beyond words and confrontations. Silently, she stepped away from the group and walked a few paces toward the creek. A gentle breeze carried the unique fragrance of that place. Crystal clear water, ancient moss, and something indefinable that seemed to hold the very essence of life. From where she stood, partially shielded by lichen-covered rocks, she could see the bear now lying peacefully on the opposite bank. The animal wasn't sleeping or showing aggression. It simply watched the humans from a distance with that ancient intelligence that had impressed her from their first encounter. The last rays of the afternoon sun cast golden reflections on the bear's fur and the crystal water. A combination so perfect, it seemed deliberately orchestrated by the elements. Amber felt silent tears roll down her cheeks. Not from sadness or relief, but from a deep understanding that transcended words. Thank you, Grandma, she thought, feeling strangely connected to Eleanor in that moment. You always knew I'd come back. With hands now perfectly steady, she raised her camera and focused on the majestic animal, capturing its almost serene expression against the backdrop of the shimmering waterfall where mysterious crystals reflected the light like submerged stars. This would be the photo that told the true story, not of a fierce predator, but of a guardian, protecting something precious, not just for itself, but for the entire forest, and perhaps for humanity. 3 months later, Amber stood before Crystal Creek once more, but this time she wasn't alone. Accompanied by scientists from the NIBC, biologists from a federal university, and Catherine, the geologist, she meticulously documented the area that had now been officially declared the Eleanor Crawford Nature Sanctuary, a special protection category that barred any form of commercial exploitation. The road to this moment had been turbulent and exhausting. There had been tense public hearings where local residents were divided between preservation supporters and those lured by the promise of jobs at the resort. Amber had faced intimidation attempts, from veiled threats to a mysterious break-in at her grandmother's house, where thankfully the intruders hadn't found the most important documents, already moved to a bank vault. Unexpected support came from Mrs. Margaret, who rallied the region's oldest residents with stories of how Eleanor Crawford had, decades earlier, prevented contamination from a nearby river from affecting the town's water supply. Imagine what would happen if they destroyed Crystal Creek now, the elderly woman argued with surprising vigor for her 83 years. It's not just a piece of land, it's our very lives at stake. The decisive turning point came when an independent lab confirmed that the creek's water, naturally infused with minerals from the crystals, had anti-inflammatory and regenerative properties comparable to advanced medications, but without significant side effects. The study, urgently published due to the circumstances, sparked a wave of interest from the international scientific community. The story of the bear that saved a woman in the forest had quickly transcended local boundaries, capturing the imagination of the entire country. Amber Crawford's photographs, showing the majestic animal defending the creek and then ignoring her human presence, went viral globally. The image of the confrontation between the bear and the wolf, with Amber standing between them, had been published on the covers of international nature magazines, accompanied by headlines like "The Unlikely Guardian" and "When Nature Chooses Its Protectors." Animal behavior experts hotly debated the bear's unusual behavior. Some argued it was simply territorialism, while others proposed more complex theories about how the animal might have developed a symbiotic relationship with the creek's unique ecosystem. Researchers from various countries now sought permission to study both the bear's behavior and the medicinal properties of the water, naturally infused with minerals from the crystals. As for Richard Blackwell, the powerful businessman had faced a fate his political connections and fortune couldn't avoid. Multiple investigations revealed decades of environmental violations, document forgery, and intimidation of opponents. The most devastating revelation came from his own company's archives, documents proving he had personally funded the false analysis that destroyed Amber's reputation, part of a deliberate strategy to silence potential opposition to his project. In Wolf Ridge, the lawsuits resulted in the temporary suspension of all his projects as authorities examined charges that now extended beyond environmental forgery and illegal exploitation, including cartel formation, tax evasion, and bribery of public officials. His once impeccable reputation was in tatters. As for Amber's reputation, the contrast couldn't have been greater. In an extraordinary twist, evidence of the conspiracy against her had emerged during the Blackwell investigations. Emails, payments to experts, and even the original and manipulated versions of her photographs were found on corporate servers. The magazine that had published the original accusations now scrambled with retractions and apologies, offering Amber not only substantial compensation, but also the cover of their next special issue on environmental conservation. Fully vindicated, professionally, she received lucrative offers from major publications to cover the story of the bear and the creek, along with invitations to international lectures and even documentary proposals. Tyler, her former agent, called daily with new opportunities, each more tempting than the last. To many surprise, especially Tyler's, Amber turned most of them down. Instead of returning to city life and the commercial circuit she once valued so highly, she decided to settle permanently in her grandmother's house, now carefully restored but retaining its original rustic charm. "I spent years chasing recognition, thinking I had to prove my worth through success in New York City," she explained to Daniel during one of their now frequent candlelit dinners on the house's porch. "Only now do I understand what my grandmother meant when she said, 'Some roots must grow deep so the branches can reach the sky.'" With support from national and international conservation organizations, Amber transformed part of the property into a small but sophisticated environmental education center. The Eleanor Crawford Institute for Conservation and Research quickly became a model for integrating local communities, advanced science, and environmental preservation. There, children and adults could learn about the importance of preserving natural ecosystems through educational programs that combined the traditional knowledge of long-time residents with the latest scientific discoveries. Mrs. Margaret, now a constant presence at the Institute, had become a sort of unofficial historian, enchanting visitors with stories about Eleanor Crawford and her battles to protect the forest. "Amber is the spitting image of her grandmother," she would often tell the student groups visiting the center. "Same stubbornness, same heart." In her free time, away from the Institute's administrative duties, Amber continued doing what she loved most, photographing the reserve's wildlife. Her special focus, naturally, was documenting the bear that had changed her life, always observing it from a safe distance and with all the respect the guardian of the creek deserved. The images she captured, now published on a blog that attracted followers from around the world, helped raise awareness about the importance of preserving not just this specific area, but all threatened ecosystems. Her relationship with Daniel had naturally evolved from professional friendship to something deeper. Sharing a love for nature and memories of Eleanor, they found themselves united by a common purpose that transcended their initial attraction. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Daniel often remarked, understanding that for Amber there could be no higher praise. One especially beautiful autumn morning, Amber rose before dawn and walked alone to a high vantage point overlooking Crystal Creek. The morning mist hovered over the water like an ethereal veil, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. She set up her tripod, meticulously adjusted her camera, and waited patiently as the sky gradually shifted from deep indigo to violet, then pink, and finally a radiant gold. That was when she spotted her furry friend emerging silently from the forest on the opposite bank. The bear, now the subject of study for biologists who monitored it respectfully from a distance, looked healthier and more robust than ever. Amber watched in awe as it surveyed its surroundings with those ancient, wise eyes, so different from ordinary predators. The bear gazed directly at her for a long moment, as if recognizing not just her physical presence, but something deeper, an ally in their shared mission to protect this sacred place. There was no fear or aggression in that look, only a kind of mutual understanding that transcended the barriers between species. Then, with the majestic dignity that defined it, the animal calmly stepped into the water for its morning ritual. The first rays of the rising sun creating a golden halo around its imposing silhouette. Amber captured the scene, her hands perfectly steady despite the emotion she felt. Then she lowered the camera and simply watched, allowing herself to fully experience the moment without the lens as an intermediary. A serene smile lit up her face as she reflected on how circumstances had changed so dramatically in such a short time. The bear hadn't just saved her physically during that confrontation with the wolf, or even from the threat posed by Richard Blackwell. It had saved something far more valuable, her faith in nature, in justice, in the possibility of new beginnings when all seemed lost. "Thank you," she whispered to the animal, knowing it probably couldn't hear her over the distance and the sound of flowing water, but feeling the need to express her gratitude all the same. And as the sun rose fully on the horizon, bathing the forest in golden hues and making the crystals in the creek sparkle like submerged stars, Amber knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found her true purpose, not just to photograph nature as a distant observer, but to actively protect it, to educate others about its importance, and to preserve its delicate balance for future generations. Just as her grandmother had done before her, just as the bear continued to do instinctively. The real reason the bear had saved her wasn't so surprising after all. It wasn't mere animal altruism or a miraculous coincidence, as some sensationalist journalists had suggested. It was something far deeper and truer, the instinctive recognition between guardians, the silent bond between beings devoted to the same cause, both protecting something that had no monetary value, something no luxury resort or mining operation could ever replace, the wild purity that, once lost, could never truly be recovered. The end. What did you think of this story of redemption and environmental protection? Were you moved by the connection between Amber and the bear? Leave your comment, your like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that make us reflect on our relationship with nature